Let's bring in Jonathan Schanzer. He's Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former counterterrorism analyst at the Treasury Department. Couldn't have had a better guest today. Jonathan, explain to us how we have additional sanctions and what it means to actually target the Supreme Leader himself.
Well, I think, first of all, the president has made this personal. He's made this very clear that he's going to the very top of the food chain in the Iranian political system. But I think there's even more symbolism here, and that is that we've known for a long time now that Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader of Iran, is a kleptocrat, that he's been enriching himself at the expense of the Iranian people. And so now that we're beginning to target his assets, one can only hope that we'll begin to identify the assets contained in what they call ICO. It's basically a $200 billion fund that he controls. And so hopefully we'll begin to start to freeze those assets and make clear how much of a kleptocrat Ali Khamenei actually is.
And just so those of us who've never worked at the Treasury Department can understand, how do you technically do that? That means, how do we freeze those assets? Do we just tell everybody they're not allowed to leave that system?
Well, what we do is we send out identifier information about either individuals or companies or cutouts, any information that we have about this network. We send it to the banks, we send it to other countries that work with us on isolating those assets, and we make it clear that those cannot be traded or that they cannot work within the banking system. You have to remember, we control the world's financial system. We created it. It's basically all ones and zeros, and if we are the ones in control of it, then it's a great deal of power in our hands.
Do you think that the sanctions that were added today are enough to make him feel enough pain to either come back to the table to negotiate with President Trump, or do you think it's just going to take a long time for him because he's so isolated, and I'm sure that they don't want to lose face in this regard?
No, they certainly don't, and I think we continue to see from the Supreme Leader that he says he won't come to the table, he won't work with Trump. And I have to say, it's unclear. I doubt the guy's holding any assets in dollars at this point, given the sanctions that we've been piling on. But if he finds that it's even harder to work out there in the international financial system, he'll feel the pain. And I think you also have to remember that this is on top of all these other sanctions that we've been placing on Iran for the last year, and they have definitely been feeling the squeeze.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because the sanctions are actually also hurting the civilians, the people who live there. They are feeling all the inflation, which is at an alarming rate. And I noted this quote from an Iranian accountant who gave this to a newspaper there, saying, "The economic war is a reality and people are under extreme pressure. Government leaders keep telling us to be strong and endure the pressures, but we can already hear the sound of our bones breaking." Is the Iranian leadership at all persuaded to do anything different because their people are suffering? Absolutely not. And this is, obviously one of the unfortunate elements of our sanctions regime. I mean, there are a lot of people who say that the pain is being passed on to the people. Of course, when we say that it's being passed on, we have to note that it is the regime itself that is ensuring its own survival and ensuring the hardship of its own people. It could be diverting funds away from its military program, away from its nuclear enrichment, and away from its terrorism support, but it doesn't do that, and it passes on the pain to the average Iranian. Let me put up a list of the countries that Secretary Pompeo is visiting before he heads to the G20 summit. Saudi Arabia, UAE, India, Japan, and then, of course, the Republic of Korea towards the end of the month. Is part of the message when you're working, does the Treasury Department and the State Department have to work together in lockstep to make the diplomacy work so that the Pentagon doesn't have to actually come in and take any action?
That's exactly right. That is the playbook. It's about showing the Iranians that we have an international coalition that is committed to isolating them. A couple of things to note, though. Number one is that the UAE is one of the top trading partners of Iran. There's a lot of pain that we can still impose on Iran if the UAE cuts off some of that trade. And also, we're hearing that the Indians may be willing to deploy some of their warships to the Gulf to ensure that there's freedom of navigation. We're hoping the Saudis do the same, so that it's not an only
just the
US
United
effort.
States. Right, and President Trump tweeting about that this morning as well. Jonathan Schanzer, great to have you here. Thank you.